is happening on Wall Street.
Economic indicators.
Who knows where this is going to end up?
To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
How are you doing there? It is the weekly podcast. It's David. We all know the score. We're going to try and make economics that little bit more comprehensible, that little bit more up to date, and hopefully add a little bit of insight into all of our understanding of the links between economics, politics, and actually this week we're going to talk about the law, which is unusual for us, because this week we're going to talk about the United States, the impeachment process, what it's all about, how it's likely to pan out, and how it frames American politics as we move into the election year. As always, I have John with me, but before I talk to him, I'm going to tell you he's looking very down at heel. On that basis, if you do like the stuff, and if you do enjoy the podcast, consider supporting us on Patreon, simply because putting it all together is a hoot, as you know, and you can hear it in our voices, but it does cost a wee bit, and it would be great if you could support us on Patreon. Of course, this week is our big live show week in Vicar Street. Both John and I thought that our mothers would only turn up, and they actually are going to turn up. They are. They have a combined age of 170, which is pretty impressive. And they're going to be there, the pair of them. But
giving it socks. Amazingly,
and I really mean this, selling out Vicar Street is a big deal. So thank you all very much for coming along. It's a huge deal for us to sell out on our first live podcast.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be there
Thursday night doing our thing.
How are you feeling ahead of that, man?
No, it's going to be good. Like I said before, you give me a stage, we'll use it.
Listen, it's
but in front of the ma.
In front of the ma. That's the problem. You have to be nice in front of the ma. That's the problem. You remember Bill...
Watch your language, Mac.
Oh, yeah, I know. And mine can be very foul, as you know. It can get really, as my mother-in-law said, it can very blue. But as Bill Clinton once, said about campaigning, it's showtime. So showtime on Thursday night. Anyway, let us plow on. Good week, John?
Yeah, very good week. Busy all week. All the big projects have kind of wound up now, so I'm kind of getting my head back together slightly.
Good.
One of those big projects, of course, was the audiobook.
The audiobook, which will be out next week. And can you believe it? On Thursday, it looks like we will hit the 1 million download of this podcast, which is pretty cool.
That is amazing. That is absolutely incredible.
Cool. Okay, so again, thank you all very much. But let's plow on. John, you were talking to me yesterday. You said, why don't we do something on American politics? It's been on your mind.
Yeah, I kind of follow American politics. It's a circus. The whole thing is a circus, but it's a bit of a scary circus, and Trump is that scary clown. But the whole thing is rattling on. I'm not really sure if he's going to go down or not. I find it hard to... It seems so obvious to me and to most people that he's as crooked as be Jesus. We know he's an idiot anyway, but is he going to go down? And he's so slippery. I'm not sure if this impeachment is going to work. And I often said as well is that be careful what you wish for, because if Trump is impeached, we're left with President Pence, who's a complete loon.
Well, what we might do, we might leave your personal view of President Pence behind. No, but I think you're probably right. I think he is probably a bit of a creationist and all that sort of strange stuff.
Yeah.
But to clarify matters, let's talk to somebody who really understands this. One of the great things about Kilkenomics over the years is you get to meet great minds.
Yeah.
And one of the great ones is Bill Black. He is an old friend. He is an amazing character, special prosecutor, U.S. financial regulator, put people behind bars. Let's get him up in the line from Kansas City, Missouri, and let's ask Bill what he thinks of what's going on. Bill, how are you? Good to talk to you.
I'm good, thanks.
So, Bill, tell me, what is an impeachment?
Impeachment is, if you're precise, is essentially like a grand jury that decides to indict someone, saying that there is probable evidence that they have committed a violation of the legal standard. In this case, impeachment is something we inherited from the Brits. It was used in our colonial period to remove royal officials, which the Brits didn't appreciate very much, who were acting corruptly and such. People don't know generally that the United States did not begin under the Constitution, but instead under the Articles of Confederation, where we had no head of state. It wasn't a true national government. It was, as the name implies, just a confederation of co-equal sovereign states. Didn't work very well. Decided they needed to create a strong executive. As soon as they created a strong executive, a president, they said, oh my God, that's what we had problems with, strong executives. How are we going to restrain them? And the answer they came up with was impeachment. Now, at this juncture, there were no federal laws. So they couldn't say, if you violate the following federal laws, you'll be impeached. So they used a more general phrase. And that general phrase was treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. But we have a lot of history that shows us some content as to what they meant. First thing they meant is it was up to Congress to define, not the courts. So this isn't reviewable by the courts. Second thing was they gave examples. And they said, okay, we're going to give broad presidential powers, but if the president uses those powers for corrupt purposes, then the remedy of impeachment is available. So in particular, we know from what's called the Federalist Papers, which is where our founders debated these things and proselytized about them, that they had in mind abusing the powers that are ordinarily legal by doing so for a corrupt purpose that was designed to help you, the president, rather than the nation. And second, they were worried about treasonous type things. Because remember, we had just come from the United Kingdom. One of our top generals had turned out to be a spy for the British. And we had senior officials who, in fact, the first impeachment action was against someone who was actually working with the British corruptly to try to seize part of the United States for the United Kingdom.
Okay, excellent, Bill, because that has put it into brilliant historical context for me now. So tell me about Trump. He has done, on both these issues, he is allegedly to have enriched himself, or at least eventually enriched his own political career, and treasonously maybe undermine the interests of the state. So is it the two issues that they're going at him for, or just one?
So the case against Trump, remember, this is only the grand jury stage. The actual trial, if by majority vote, the House of Representatives, acting akin to a grand jury, gives the equivalent of an indictment, which we call impeachment, then there's an actual trial in the Senate. And it's presided over by the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. And that one requires a supermajority of 2/3. It's a simple majority in the House. That the Senate requires a 2/3 supermajority to actually convict, at which point you are typically removed from office. And impeachment has been used roughly a dozen times against various federal officials, mostly judges, 2 U.S. presidents, and most famously, of course, Nixon, who was not actually impeached because before the vote could be had in the House, a delegation of Republicans went to him, said, you're doomed in both the House and the Senate, and Tricky Dick decided to resign in those circumstances. The Democrats are trying to put together both of the core concerns that led the framers to put the impeachment clause in. So they're both saying you have corruptly used your powers for personal gain by going after your leading political opponent and trying to use the powers of the government to force yet another government, which has been the framers' concern, that other governments were getting involved in the United States in its very early stages. We were quite vulnerable to this. It happened several times. In reality, it was in the forefront of their minds. And so Trump has blundered into something where he gets a foreign government to involve and allegedly, according to many people, to benefit not the Ukraine, but of course, Putin. And so the Democrats are well within the core of what those concerns were of the framers. So that's been intelligent on their part. And you've just heard in the last several days that the Speaker of the House, which is the most senior position in our House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, has explicitly called it bribery. Why? Because that's one of the specific things listed in the Constitution as a basis for impeachment. And bribery includes, by the way, not just succeeding in bribery, but trying to bribe someone, even if they say no. That constitutes a felony in the United States. It isn't that you would be prosecuted for that felony unless and until you were removed from office, but it is an explicit basis for impeachment. So again, the Democrats are being good lawyers in specifically calling it bribery. Obviously, it's really bribery and extortion, some combination that they're alleging.
Bill, can I ask you about just your own experience of white-collar crime and going after and arranging the case and going through the material and building your case against a president? I mean, how would a special prosecutor build their case against a president? And what would they be coming up against on the other side?
So a special prosecutor would have far more powers and would use them typically far more aggressively. And I played a small role in one of these special prosecutors. But as you said, I led many investigations of elite white-collar criminals. So a prosecutor would have a real grand jury. And in a real grand jury, the defendant's or the witness's lawyer is not allowed, even in the room, to give advice. If you seek any advice, you have to ask for a postponement and then go out and ask your lawyer something. And so, the grand jury is a very powerful thing, and it seeks not just your testimony, but all of your documents. So a normal special prosecutor would have never done what Mueller did in his investigation. They would have absolutely subpoenaed the president of the United States and forced him to either testify or in front of cameras say, I refuse to testify on the grounds that it might tend to incriminate me, which, politically could be suicide. For reasons that pass all understanding, Mueller allowed Trump to give written response to questions. And of course, the written responses are written by his lawyers. And so it's utterly useless. And everyone knew in advance it would be utterly useless. So what would I do? I would use the grand jury. I would bring in all these folks that are actually being brought in, but I would have all the documents. That would be the key difference. In the United States, we have much broader abilities than many countries to get the underlying documents. And what you have seen is the underlying documents are terrible for Trump. And then I would put Trump, on the stand and force him to either answer the questions or, as we call it, take the Fifth Amendment. And if he answered the questions, we already have past experience where Trump had to answer questions by lawyers under extended questions under oath. And he lied constantly. And he was caught at it. And he had to admit on the record that he had lied terribly. So it would be catastrophic for the president in those circumstances if you had a real investigation. The Democrats are in a problem, and they've attempted to, make lemonade out of the lemons that they've been dealt. So the Trump administration is obstructing everything. It's telling every witness, do not testify, every witness that they want. And so you're seeing an extraordinary thing. It's now going to be somewhere near 10 members of his administration or employees, senior officials that he often appointed personally, who have said, no, I'm going to go to Congress and I'm going to tell the truth. But they're still being denied the use of their documents. And many of these people were incredible note takers. So again, those would be killer. And so Trump is trying to stall the whole thing and get it past the election, of course. The Democrats' response is the right one tactically. They're saying, if you do that, then we will make a separate charge. And this same charge was used against Bill Clinton and it was used against Nixon, which is by your refusal to answer your questions, your refusal to provide documents without any legal basis, you have obstructed the inquiry. And that itself is a basis for impeachment. So expect to see that.
Bill, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
What does Article 2 of the Constitution mean for Trump? Trump has been kind of mentioning this every so often.
Sure. Article 1 is the Congress, the powers and duties of the Congress. Article 2 is the powers and duties of the executive branch. And so Trump's position is, if I have legal authority to do something, that legal power is unchecked. As I told you, the framers' view was different. Yeah. They said, yes, you have that power, but if you do it for a corrupt purpose, it is a violation of the Constitution, and you can be impeached for that. So what we're getting at in a bit is, the way we would normally start law school in America is say, when we were teaching constitutional law. Well, we in the United States have a written constitution, whereas the Brits have an unwritten constitution that consists of traditions. What we've discovered with Trump is how much of an unwritten constitution we also had. So, for example, it was absolutely inappropriate for a president of the United States by tradition to be involved in saying, hey, my Department of Justice should be used to prosecute these folks and these folks, but not these folks, right? But it turns out that tradition just went away with Trump, where he almost openly does those things. And now the question is, and his party is saying, okay, now probably it'll say, okay, but only if Republicans do it. But otherwise, you create a new tradition, right? And the new tradition is a big chunk of our unwritten Constitution is gone forever. So That was very interesting. Remember, the Brexit decision by their highest court was on tradition about what it meant to an equally weird, in fact, even weirder word and procedure, proroguement. When that was remember, it was, yes, you have this power to do this. Yes, it is the norm, but you cannot do it to avoid allowing the democratic process to work with regard to Brexit. That was the precise nature of the ruling. So it's quite analogous to what we've been saying. Yes, you have a power, but you cannot use it for corrupt purposes, was the decision of the High Court there.
Okay, so what's your sense now, given all your experience, given your legal experience, given the fact that you've been at the center of something not exactly similar, but a huge, huge event in American public life, and you were on the side of the good guys. What's your sense of how this is going to play out?
In the House, it's going to play out very badly for the president. And indeed, the biggest thing is, can the president take it psychologically? As you know, at the best of times, he has the thinnest of skins. You can imagine for any person, and he lashes out in ways that are childish, basically tantrums and such. And he's done that. He did that stupidly and badly earlier about our former ambassador that he fired for absolute no good reason, smear. And she was the great anti-corruption person. His claim, of course, is that this is all about fighting corruption. He got rid of our best fighter against corruption instead. So Trump may do some spectacularly stupid things in response. The Democrats have finally figured out they have to get rid of this stupid 5-minute rule, which is, each member of the committee gets to ask 5 minutes of questions, and they rotate between Republicans and Democrats, and there's no cohesion, and it's easy as a witness just to stall them for 5 minutes and such. So now they do blocks of questions, and the primary questioning is done by professional investigative litigator types, people like me and such. And so seeing vastly more effective questioning, you see witnesses that are incredibly, it's like they came out of Hollywood casting for being the best of America. And then you see the Republicans attacking them for, they just attacked somebody on the basis that he was born in the Ukraine. Who's wounded in the service of the United States.
This was the soldier that...
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and such. So they're going to, since Trump lies about everything and lied about what he did in Ukraine, the Republican defense has decided that they have to lie too and smear everyone. So we've never seen anything like that. We've always had some degree of bipartisan, some degree of civility, some degree of seriousness about the task, that this is really among the most important things that we do. That's gone entirely. We've never seen the United States like this. And unless things change enormously, of course, at the end of this process, there will be a vote. It's clear from the evidence that the Democrats will vote to impeach. They have a majority that is sufficient to adopt articles of impeachment. Unless something changes dramatically, they will have next to no or literally no Republicans supporting it. And then Trump will win in the Senate, where the Republicans have a majority. And we'll see whether the majority leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, who is quite he's the guy who said when Obama was elected president, his mission in life, McConnell's mission in life, was to ensure that he was not a two-term president. That also was unprecedented in U.S. history. So McConnell may dramatically circumscribe this trial to protect Trump as well. And then we'll have an election on that basis with an incredibly divided nation.
Bill, thank you so much for succinctly analysing the issues and explaining your crazy situation to us mere mortals.
Cheers, Bill.
Bye.
Cheers.
Jesus, your man Bill is brilliant, isn't he?
He's brilliant, and he really clarifies everything. But I suppose he did conclude that the Republicans will be partisan, first time ever, and the Democrats, although they might legally be right, they probably won't get rid of Trump.
Okay, so come here, tell me this then. We're a year out from the election. The Democratic race during the summer was up to something like 20 candidates or something like that. Madness. Now it's been whittled down to about 3 or 4. But now, of course, Bloomberg has thrown his hat in the ring, which kind of shakes things up. Before we get into the economics of the whole thing, just give us your rundown of the political side. Give us a rundown of the runners and riders.
Well, the interesting thing, John, is you shouldn't be ever too shocked by weird rivalries in the left. There's a great expression when it comes to elections that the right seek converts and the left seek traitors.
Yeah.
And what that's about is that we've said it before, and it's really important. You see it here. The right wing, the Republicans, hold their nose at loads of things that Trump does, but find one piece of common ground that they can settle in and convert to his side because they're into power. The left, on the other hand, are in open war against themselves, right? So they're fighting against themselves all the time because the left always seek traitors before an election rather than galvanizing around one figure, which they will ultimately do. But right now, they are in civil war mood amongst themselves.
They tear the party apart.
They tear themselves apart. The left always do this. It's something you see it in the Irish left, you see it in the British left. There's nothing, Alistair Campbell getting kicked out of the party by Jeremy Corbyn. That's the way they are.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So let's look at the American left if you regard the Democratic Party as a left-wing party, but in the sense that it is. Obviously, this week, things have been blown apart by Bloomberg throwing his hat in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing about Michael Bloomberg, he was the mayor of New York. He brings $50 billion of firepower, his own firepower, to this election. And money really talks in the United States. He's also a really seasoned operator as the mayor of New York. He hates Trump as a fellow New Yorker. But interestingly, even though he owns the Bloomberg terminal that all financial markets works on, he doesn't apparently have great name recognition in the United States itself amongst the average dude.
Really?
So that's what he has it, but not as much as you'd think.
Yeah.
Again, underscoring the idea that New York is different. You know, it's glamorous, it's different, but in the heartland, which they have to win, Ohio.
Well, that was the mistake that the Dems made.
And also, he's another plutocrat, you know? So if you're somebody who's feeling left out, I mean, if you think Hillary Clinton's big mistake last time out was she put together an unholy alliance of Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Three very glamorous institutions of American public life, but totally remote from people. You know, her final gig was Jay-Z and Beyonce. I mean, that doesn't appeal to people anymore.
Yeah.
That just means I'm really remote. I'm really miles away. So, you know, Bloomberg runs the risk of being regarded as the plutocratic candidate, even though Trump is the real one. Now, what Bloomberg will basically say is, I'm a proper businessman. I didn't inherit my money. I built it myself. Yeah. I'm the American dream.
But it depends who he has behind him as well.
Depends who he has behind him. But anyway, that's queered the pitch a wee bit. And we'll definitely come back to Bloomberg because he is a fascinating character. And as mayor of New York, he has got a track record. But more importantly, John, he's got 50 billion smackers in his arse pocket.
Well, I'm sure there's a couple of skeletons in the cupboard as well.
Oh, absolutely.
It'll be fun when they come bounding out.
So then you have another piece of news we have is Bernie, my old mate. This time last year, I was at Bernie's thinking, I'm actually a fellow of the Sanders Institute. So I'm close enough to the to that side. And as I said to Bernie when I met him, I said, look, Bernie, I'm not particularly left-wing. And he said, no, but, you know, we need people from outside the United States to talk to us about what's going on outside the States, because they are very, very insular. And I was up in Vermont this weekend last year at his Think-In, which is a beautiful place. It's kind of like Denmark with nuclear power. Or nuclear weapons, right? Like you fly into it and it's really all sort of Scandinavian and lovely and feels like Danish and they're into their welfare state and what have you, except you see the entire airport is full of F-111s. It's a US Air Force base.
Right, is it? Okay,
so it's that horrible. It's kind of like, it's like Scandinavia.
Yeah.
But if you can imagine Scandinavia with the Russians' military arsenal on tarmac.
Right.
That's what it feels like.
Angry Danes.
Yeah, angry Danes, exactly. And Bernie this week, we see, is the first politician ever in the United States to pass 4 million individual donations.
Right.
Now, this is the polar opposite to Bloomberg, obviously, number one.
But, what does that mean?
It means people have given him a few quid, you know, a couple of dollars, $5, $10, $20. But what it means for politics, and I think this is much more important than the money, even though the money is crucially important, is that's an army. That's 4 million people who will go out and work for you, who've pledged money. They're not just supporters. They are members of a movement. And that's what Bernie will tap into as the campaign goes on.
His heart is in the right place. I'm not sure about him.
But his heart was nearly dodgy. His heart was actually...
But it's put back in the right place.
Exactly, his fixed ticker. No, but again, so he's competing with Elizabeth Warren. And Elizabeth Warren... I interviewed years ago, I did an Australian TV broadcast called Addicted to Money, which was a really interesting show for ABC in Australia. Right. And I interviewed Elizabeth Warren when she was a professor at Harvard. And she was so clear, so concise. And also what she had was an amazing turn of phrase. Yeah. And an amazing turn of phrase is very important for the campaign. She's quick as hell, right? Look at her policies because she looks as if she has the momentum behind her for the Democratic race. Of course, Biden is still the old man at the top, okay? But there is a sense that Biden can only lose from here. And who's the momentum with? Elizabeth Warren. And she has a really interesting economic policy that if she were elected would change the shape of American capitalism for a generation or two. I look at her and who I see is Eleanor Roosevelt. Oh, yeah. Eleanor Roosevelt was the wife of FDR. And many, many people say that Eleanor Roosevelt was the brains behind the operation.
Okay.
But Roosevelt comes in 1932. America needs to reset the dial. And Roosevelt and Elizabeth Warren understood one thing about capitalism, which is that capitalism has a tendency towards monopoly, right? The objective of being in a company is to monopolize the market.
Of course, yeah.
And so once you understand that she understands this, that she's saying the tendency is for companies to err towards monopoly, and therefore at some stage, every generation or two, America needs to reset itself because the monopolies have become too big. This is her essential idea. And because the monopolies have become too big, the fat cats at the top are getting everything. The working man and woman at the bottom or in the middle are getting nothing. So this is the way she has framed the election. And I find this interesting because it sounds to me like Roosevelt and the New Deal in the 1930s. So what Roosevelt comes in, he comes in after the Great Crash, which is not the tailwind that Warren might come in on. But what she comes in on is the great fraud, which is Trump. And if she comes in after the great fraud, there will be a natural tendency in the United States to reset that particular clock. Also, I think what's going really well for her at the moment is that all the big beasts of American capitalism are out against her. So Lloyd Blankfein, who is the former head of Goldman Sachs, was out against her. Steven Schwarzman, who's the head of BlackRock, which is one of the biggest investment companies, is out against her. They're all coming out and saying, this woman is dangerous.
Yeah.
Now,
not surprising.
She's saying, you know what? That's cool with me. FDR also was accused by big America of being dangerous. And he said, I sense that they hate me and I welcome their hate. That was his election campaign.
Wow.
So what you have...
Hang on, just before you go there, because she's also talking about breaking up the likes of Facebook and all those kind of characters.
Her basic idea is that capitalism has a tendency towards monopoly. If competition were working, it would be reducing profits for companies and giving back to the average consumer better deals. What we see in America is the opposite. Profits are never been higher.
Yeah.
Companies are buying back their shares. That's enriching their shareholders. It's enriching the 1%. The difference between her and Bernie describes himself as a democratic socialist who believes in socialism, as does Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. They're socialists. She's saying, no, I'm a capitalist, but we need to reset capitalism. It's got too out of chunk.
Yeah, because of course the word socialist, everyone is terrified of that in the States.
Yeah, I know they are. They are. So her thing is not redistribution, but what she calls pre-distribution. So before the spoils of the economy are delivered to the rich guys, and then government's job is to redistribute the spoils, she's saying, no. Pre-distribution, let's not let the spoils of the economy and let's reset capitalism. So what she's saying
how does that work?
So what she's saying is that we need to break up large monopolies. So you take Facebook. She's saying Facebook will be forced by American courts to sell WhatsApp and Instagram. That basically there's been too much of a concentration of power. She's looking at American pharmaceuticals and saying, you are taking far too much of the health service, so we're going to break you up. She's looking at American banking. She's talking about reintroducing a thing called the Glass-Steagall Act, which was an act that Roosevelt introduced in the 30s, which breaks banks up between deposit banks, where people deposit their money, and investment banks. Now, what happened in the banking system is the investment part of the banks was using depositors' money to speculate on risky shit. Okay. She's saying, that's over. If you want to do your risky stuff, you use your own balance sheet. You do not use depositors. This is all eminently sensible stuff.
I was going to say, I actually didn't realise that went on.
She's also saying, look, private equity, which is the be-all and end-all of Wall Street, right? I'm the big balls guy. You remember Gordon Gekko?
Yeah.
Gordon Gekko was...
Greed is good.
Greed is good. Well, Gordon Gekko, it's amazing that movie was from the 80s, not in the 90s, right?
Oh, look at the garb and the get-up.
I know. It's great.
Big hair, big shoulders.
We should get that shit on, man. I'd love a double-breasted suits, the whole thing.
I think I still have one.
But listen, Gordon Gekko, I don't know if you remember the plot line in Wall Street.
I do, yeah.
The row was between Charlie Sheen and his dad, Martin Sheen.
Yeah.
Martin Sheen was the union head of some airliner. Charlie Sheen was Gordon Gekko's go-to bagman.
Yeah.
This is before he became his own bagman in the bizarre hooker trade over in California, which he did, right? But if you remember the story, right, the drama was between the morality of Martin Sheen and Charlie, father and son. It was against the background of the deregulation of the American airline industry, where airlines all came up for sale, and guys like Gordon Gekko, who were predators, came in, bought the companies, private equity guys, right? Sort of vulture funds that own half of Ireland, right? Squeeze the asset, screw the workers, default on their pensions, and then sell on the now lean machine to another investor. That's their business model. And the morality play in the middle of it was the father and son relationship, right? What Warren is saying is those guys, the Gordon Gekkos, those private equity guys, you can do whatever you want, but I'm going to tax you. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to tax you. I'm going to rein you in because you are in an era of deregulation. You are amplifying inequalities because you're sucking all the juice out of these companies. Actually, if you ever want to get behind Wall Street, there's an amazing book by Connie Brooks called The Predator's Ball. And The Predator's Ball was about the rise of Michael Milken, who was the king of these private equity guys. And it was a once-a-year ball of these big swinging dicks. And it is definitely an outrageous read.
Right.
It's really, really good. So what Warren is saying is, I'm going to go after all these types of fat cats, not because I want to, in order to tax them. What she's saying is, I'm going to tax the top 2% of American wealth households 15%. She said, I'm going to tax anybody who has an income or a net wealth of over 50 million. I'm going to tax them by 2%. And I'm going to tax billionaires 3% on their net wealth.
That's
totally logical.
Yeah, but it's also bugger all.
It's bugger all. But if you think about
in
it,
that grand scheme of things,
Bill Gates is worth $107 billion, which is kind of ridiculous, right? For him, Warren would suggest he has to pay $6.7 billion, right? Which is still a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
And what she's saying is, we're going to take money off the incredibly rich and we're going to give it to provide maternity leave in the United States, to cancel student loans, and to make public universities, not the Ivy League, public universities free.
Yeah.
This can be all done. It's been costed by simply taxing the 1%. Now, obviously, the 1% are going mad about this. But what she's doing is she's tapping into this sense that the United States is incredibly unequal. So what she's also saying is that companies in the States which have profits of over $100 million, she's going to tax them an extra 7%. But what she's saying, and this is interesting for Ireland, it's not on your profits that you record after you go through the loopholes that you have got your lobbyists to get off the government.
Yeah.
It's on the profits in your accounts. Because what she's saying is that all these companies understate their profits using loopholes. Why do they get the loopholes? Because they pay the lobbyists. The lobbyists lobby Congress. This is this thing called 16th Street in Washington, which is all lobbyists. She says that lobbyists are the cancer in American political office. And she's right. That's why...
There's lobbyists in every...
There's lobbyists,
country.
but in the United States, it's really, really... It's kind of in your face.
Right, okay.
Right? So what she's saying is the market works, but the reason, for example, that the tech giants can get more and more powerful, the reason carbon emissions are not taxed, the reason pharmaceutical companies in America get away with murder, i.e. huge high prices, is because of lobbyists. So you've got to attack them. So what she's saying is capitalism works if it's fair and you have rules. Because of the tendency towards monopoly, we're at a stage now where the rules have been broken. It's unfair. The rich are getting too much. The poor aren't getting enough. We reset the dial. We start again, which is exactly what Roosevelt said in the 30s. He said capitalism and the market is the way in which we get rich. But over time, some get too rich and others lose out. So we reset the dial. And the interesting thing is, up until this person emerging, Elizabeth Warren, everyone thought that's Bernie, that's radical, etc.
Yeah.
She's saying, look, since 1979, the top 5% in the United States have seen their income rise, income, not wealth, income, by 225%. The average middle-class family has seen their income rise by 42%. So the top is rising 5 times faster than the middle, which is also rising much faster than the bottom. And she's saying to create a new society, a new America, what we've got to do is reset the clock.
And do you think this is resonating with
Yeah, it's resonating because...
But Biden is still beating her in the polls.
He is, because of name recognition.
Right.
You know, he's been a 2-time vice president. Joe Biden's been around for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Everybody says he's a very nice person. He's a very reasonable guy.
Sleepy Joe.
Sleepy Joe. But he doesn't represent the intellectual and policy change that the United States needs. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is she has been gradually garnering more and more support. Will that continue? I'm not sure. But it does seem to be resonating with lots and lots of ordinary Americans who are saying, I feel left out, and I think she's the one to watch.
Okay, so that sounds like a big endorsement of Elizabeth Warren.
Which will obviously do her campaign enormously, given our podcasts.
Well, of course.
Huge
we have 1 million downloads now. So, but what's the downside for Elizabeth Warren? And have you considered the others?
I think the downside with Warren is she maybe puts too much store in the state. And we know from, as Europeans, that the state is not a great operator in most cases. And of course, the question is whether or not, if she goes after the mega rich in America, will it lead to a vilification of the rich? And therefore will lead to a change in the way America does business? Will American capital fly offshore? By saying I'm going to break up the biggest companies and by saying I'm going to break up the private equity, she's going to destroy Wall Street. Now, lots of people say that's a very, very good thing, that Wall Street doesn't contribute anything. But my own sense is that it is part and parcel of the American way. And if you go after finance and you really crush it, which is what she might end up doing, is there a sense that you actually do more damage? And of course, the final thing, John, is that this is the sort of policy that Obama wanted to go and say.
Yeah.
But maybe he couldn't say because of his color. Ooh. So the thing is that when you are already stoking up racial issues because of your very color, that maybe Obama couldn't do what he wanted to do because he didn't want to give fuel to people who say, look, that's what happens if you have an ethnic president. Yeah. He'll take all our money away.
Well,
that's
that was Mitch McConnell, as Bill was saying earlier. It's Mitch McConnell who blocked absolutely everything.
So the amazing achievement of Obama in the first place might have militated against action in the second. Whereas Elizabeth Warren has an interesting backstory. She's from Kansas or Oklahoma, very poor, single mother in the 70s, started to work. But she's basically saying America is ready for a female president.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think so.
And it's ready for a radical reset of the capitalist button, which is different to Bernie's message, which is more, we've got to change the system.
Yeah.
And change the basic structure of the economy. She's saying, no, we've just got to make it fair.
Yeah, I just think that the whole thing will be thrown out the window depending on the result of this impeachment.
Well, if the impeachment leads, let's say there is something outrageous there, and they link.
Okay.
But something that Americans really feel is outrageous because America's so divided. So you've got like 45% still think Trump's doing a good job.
Yeah.
So
and everyone else is never Trumpers.
Never Trumpers. So, something huge has to come out. And then the Democrats have to make that stick. So if they can get something that maybe links the impeachment to Putin, for example, to Russia, and if they can actually get something which is on the area of treason, and if they can appeal to the patriotic military Republican base, which is very much America as the great superpower, And if they can find something, so let's say that happens, and he's impeached, and he brings down Pence with him, then you're into a situation where whoever is in the lead now in the Democratic Party, or those two beasts who are in the lead, which is Biden and Warren, fight it off very quickly. And you have a situation where the entire process becomes accelerated, totally contaminated by the impeachment. And the person who maybe stands for something very, very different, but within the bounds of American consciousness of how their country works, could absolutely win. And as I said, FDR won against the background of the Great Depression. Warren may well win against the background of the great fraud. And that fraud will be Trump if impeached. Before you go, I am delighted this week, really delighted, that the audio book of Renaissance Nation, updated for Brexit and what it's going to mean for us, is out on Audible this week. This is the first time I've ever done it, and it actually comes from a suggestion from you, the listeners, who said, look, we love the podcast. We don't have a huge amount of time in our hands every week to sit down and read a full book, but we'd love to hear an audiobook. So that's it, Renaissance Nation, the audiobook, out on Audible from today. Have a gander, would make a really good Christmas present, and I hope you like it.